A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of our Making Headway series. Ladies and gentlemen, today we embark on the second part of our Making Headway series about bridging the gaps in remote learning. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced many of us to confront the reality of remote, distance-based learning. Technology has helped to solve some of these challenges that remote learning and the ensuing lockdowns brought about by the pandemic. But technology is not something that's necessarily accessible for everyone. Technology may not be something that all of us are very familiar with. What tools do we use? Are the tools that we're using suitable? Are they appropriate? And do they achieve the learning outcomes that we seek? Are our students able to learn at a pace similar to when there were face-to-face classes? At the end of it, our purpose as educators is to ensure that our students are equipped with the skills that they need to be meaningful members of society and provide for themselves a meaningful life. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a lot of learning has been disrupted. But disruption does not necessarily mean an end to learning. So today, in part 2 of our Making Headway series, we're going to explore about digital tools. We're going to hear from eminent speakers, academics, researchers. We're going to hear from Ateneo Centre. We're also going to learn from teachers to understand what are the tools available out there and how do we use these tools effectively. And how can we use these tools to ensure that learning continues and that despite the pandemic, our students are able to achieve the outcomes that they desire and that we desire for them. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my great privilege to introduce the moderator for this series, Dr. Carmela Oracion from the Ateneo Centre for Educational Development in the Philippines. Dr. Oracion, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Sir Vignesh. Good afternoon, Sir Vignesh and everyone at the HEAD Foundation, esteemed panelists, fellow educators, and friends. We are happy to welcome our new participants and to welcome back the participants who were here with us last week to this 3-part webinar series on the theme, Bridging the Gaps in Remote Learning. There are 3 parts in this webinar series, beginning with last week's session on working with the community, followed by today's session on digital tools, and rehashing older technology next week on the 1st of July. In this practitioner-focused series, we explore a wide spectrum of educational technologies and show how an inclusive and engaging teaching learning process is still possible during a difficult situation such as the present pandemic, and also doable even in under-resourced schools. In the session last week, a participant sought advice on what to do to respond to teachers, students, and perhaps even parents who refuse to be retooled or updated on technology. Those who say that they do not want to use technology. Our panelists last week shared their suggestions regarding the challenge, and we summarized their inputs in 3 E's: embrace, empower, example. The evolution of the predominantly face-to-face, classroom-based, and schedule-bound teaching learning process before the pandemic into the blended and hybrid processes we have today is more clearly and more certainly now not temporary. More and more, we no longer hear ourselves saying, when we go back to the way things were before COVID-19. As we concluded last week, it is important to embrace remote teaching and learning because quite obviously, life in this planet will never go back to the way things were before the pandemic. And in education, and perhaps in other aspects of life as well, we do not grieve over that. We actually say that on a positive note. It has been said that when Winston Churchill was working to form the United Nations after World War II, he famously uttered these words: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Educators across the globe did just that this past year. Every school leader and every teacher realized that there was no time to lose, and thus worked very hard trying out all forms of alternative strategies just to ensure that learning did not suffer during the unusual circumstances. When it became imperative for us educators to explore alternatives to face-to-face classes last year, many of us were quite afraid, or perhaps rather cautious, to navigate the unfamiliar and uncharted territory marked by technology and online processes. We knew very well that it would have been disastrous to simply transplant tried and tested ways in the physical classroom to the new teaching and learning modalities. Students would have suffered from confusion and exhaustion. Teachers would have been discouraged and exasperated, and education may have deteriorated overall. There was thus a need to empower everyone who would be making the great leap from very familiar ways to new frontiers. And importantly, empowering those at the front lines meant providing concrete, relevant, and useful examples. Sir Vignesh actually added another E during his closing remarks last week: enable. And he emphasized that the HEAD Foundation has offered this webinar series to precisely enable education frontliners to traverse the new terrain effectively and confidently. Today, my dear friends, we are happy to bring you three panelists who will share with us how we can maintain quality instruction or strengthen teaching and learning all the more even during these challenging times. They will direct us to readily available and accessible tools that we can use to enhance online teaching. Miss Sabrina Ongkiko is an award-winning public school teacher at Culiat Elementary School, Philippines. Among other awards, she was given the Best Teacher Award by the Department of Education, National Capital Region, Congressional District 6. Passionate about education, she has spoken in different venues, including the UNESCO conferences in Bangkok and Paris. Sabrina advocates teacher empowerment through telling stories, which she believes encourages and opens doors for fellow educators to reflect on, articulate, and share their own stories. Miss Aury Atienza-Santos is a project manager at SEAMEO, INNOTECH's Educational Research and Innovation Office. She handles projects related to the use of mobile devices for education and cultivating digital citizenship among learners in Southeast Asia. She is currently in charge of program delivery for the alternative learning system implementers in the Philippines using mobile technology for teachers, or MT40 2.0, a teacher resource kit as the main resource material. Then our third panelist, Mr. Yeap, was with the National Institute of Education in Singapore for a decade until 2010. He is currently Director of Curriculum and Teacher Development in two schools, Pathlight School in Singapore and Anglo Singapore International School in Thailand. His area of expertise is mathematics education. Prior to the pandemic, he traveled globally to help mathematics teachers rethink their classroom practices to cultivate deep learning and learner independence. I know we are all excited to listen to our panelists already, but before that, let us break the ice through a simple poll. You see this question on your screens? In your opinion, how much did your students learn through remote teaching as compared to face-to-face classes? And you can choose from the following: 20%, 50%, 80%, 100%, or more than what they learn through face-to-face classes. I would now like to invite our participants to register your responses to this question. This afternoon, we will have Mr. Yeap Banhar come first. When we were starting to make the leap from face-to-face classes to remote teaching and learning, new ideas came to the fore, such as synchronous and asynchronous sessions, or flexible learning, or adaptive learning designs, and many other similar ideas. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Sir Banhar, who will help us reflect upon important ideas related to digital learning. Sir Banhar?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, the HEAD Foundation, for inviting me and Professor Gopinathan, as well as Dr. Oracion, for suggesting that I be part of this afternoon's session. When I was racing back from Wales last year in March because of borders closure and the subsequent weeks of things that unfolded, teachers around the world, including my colleagues, were asking me questions like, how do we make students pay attention when they are having online lessons? How do I make them turn on their videos during the lessons? And some teachers even ask, how do I conduct a test online, making sure they are not cheating as they are taking the test? This afternoon, I would like to share with you briefly and afterwards engage with you through questions, the idea of what should teachers ask as questions as they go about selecting their online tools. I will now share my screen with you. So I want to talk about educators asking the right questions when we go about choosing online tools to use. Tools, there are many. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. However, if we ask the right questions, we will be able to choose tools that will benefit our students in productive ways. Choosing the right tools, it's essentially asking ourselves in lessons, actually online or otherwise, do we all, meaning the teachers and the students, do we all need to be in the same virtual space at the same time? In other words, to synchronous or to asynchronous. The question is not how do we make students pay attention. The question is not how do I conduct tests during online lessons. The question, whether online or otherwise, is how do we engage students? That should be the questions. How do we engage students? The first set of answers lie in the learning experiences that teachers provide students with. we engage them by providing them with appropriate learning experiences. Obviously, online lessons or even face-to-face lessons cannot be all lectures or explanation by the teacher. There must be opportunity for students to do some kind of exploration of whatever they are learning. And afterwards, they may be engaged in some kind of structuring of their learning. And regardless of the subjects, but mathematics in particular, for consolidation, students do practice. And along the way, they will be writing notes. Sometimes we might call that doing a journal. They might be reading, for example, for information. And quite often, they have to be doing some kind of reflection. The question to what tools I use is the answer to the question, how do I engage them? For example, in providing them for exploration, I have a small hand in developing an online platform that was used initially in Malaysia, but subsequently also in schools in Indonesia, where teachers can engage students in exploration. There is a feature called Roundtable, where students can work in small groups, talk with each other, have face-to-face interaction, so to speak, and teachers can roam the room and listen out to what they are saying. If you're interested in this, you can contact the person on the screen to give you a little demonstration. So there are many tools, but the tools is dictated by what we want students to do. And during practice, this platform will check students' responses, allowing students to do self-assessment, self-checking, and if their responses are not appropriate, they can rethink even without the presence of a human teacher. I did some work with my colleagues in Thailand for them to do some kind of reflection, and I use this digital tool that is easy to use called Jamboard. Many of you are familiar with it. I also use it with lessons with secondary 2 students in the same school. I will now show you the Jamboard. So this is my Jamboard, for example, and participants or students can write in the Jamboard. And as a teacher, I can see whatever they are doing live, even as they do it. I wonder if one of my colleagues from Thailand is also online, and let's see if he's online. If he is, he will respond. I wonder whether he's online. If he is, oh, he is. So you see, he just joined the Jamboard and he is responding to us. And Charles, can you say something to the participants as I go through whatever I want to share with you? So even as teachers ask what online tools I would like to use, we have to ask the question, how do we engage them? We engage them by letting them have suitable learning experiences. As they explore, as they conduct a discussion, as they do their practice, for example, as they do their homework, as this colleague of mine is doing his work, I can have a front row seat into seeing whatever that he is doing. And although we talk about this in the context of online learning, I would say that this tool is useful even in face-to-face learning. Even as students do their work in class, even though they are seated in front of me, I can take a peek at what they are doing without interfering, without interrupting their flow of thought. I do not have to intrude by peering over their shoulders. Thank you, Charles, for showing us Jamboard. All right, that's Charles responding live from Thailand, and we can see whatever he was doing immediately. And as a teacher, we also ask another set of questions. What is it that I want my students to acquire? Do I want them to learn facts? Do I want them to develop some kind of understanding? Or am I merely giving them instructions, directions to do a practical? Am I interested in them interacting with materials, like let's say reading a text from Merchant of Venice? So you can imagine watching a video of Merchant of Venice will allow students to be able to engage with the stimulus, to discuss about the theme of the play better afterwards. And if we want students to develop understanding of, let's say, long division, let's say I want them to know or to learn about 51 divided by 3, I can use a range of online tools. For example, something from Noosphere, something from Brain Camp, also something from Math Learning Center, where they can, or the teachers can, demonstrate and students can engage actively using concrete materials to see that in 51 divided by 3 is probably more productive to look at the number as 30 and 21. So tools like that are easily available, and there are options that teachers can use. So when they do long division like 51 divided by 3, they can see that they are taking out 30. As a result, they are left with 21. And when they take out the rest of it, 21, they can proceed to conduct the long division as they would when they were in class with us, resulting in 10 and 7, giving us a quotient of 17. I just want to end by saying that another set of questions that we often ask ourselves is whether or not whatever we are doing with them is informational or is it inspirational. If it is informational, I suspect technology might be a more effective, a more efficient platform to impart information to learners. However, if it is inspirational, I suspect humans would do a far better job than devices, than technology. Thank you very much. I really look forward in interacting with you afterwards. In my presentation, I hope to share with you 3 sets of questions that I hope would be helpful in choosing digital tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Banhar, for helping us see that we should not be intimidated by digital tools. Thank you for introducing us to some of these digital tools. Thank you too for emphasizing that what is essential is to be clear about the kinds of experiences we want our students to have and what we want them to learn. The 4 questions you raised are very thought-provoking. How do we engage the students? What tools do I use as a teacher? What do I want my students to learn? And finally, is what I want to do informational or inspirational? Then they should guide us in selecting the appropriate tools. Clear answers to the questions that structured Sir Banhar's presentation will allow educators to determine whether to have synchronous classes or provide the lessons through asynchronous sessions and to deliberately select the right tools. You know, in our Q&A portion here, there's a point that says, there's a comment that says, remote e-learning is driving to the point of financial competition. Those who afford to buy better electronic gadgets have more advantage than those who cannot afford. How should we minimize such financial differences, consequently reducing the technology gap? At this point, we shall now proceed to the presentation of Ms. Sabrina Ongkiko. She will share with us how they transitioned from face-to-face classes to remote teaching and learning in an environment where the majority of students had very little access to technology, as pointed out by our participant who raised the comment. Ms. Sabrina, we are now very eager to listen to your story.
Thank you, Mrs. Oracion. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm teacher Sab, and I teach at Culiat Elementary School. So Culiat is a small school in terms of size, but big in terms of population. We have around 2,000 students, mostly from poor communities in our area. So when the pandemic hit, we were so worried about access, since even without the pandemic, some of our students already find it hard to go to school. Early on, we made a survey and mapped our learners. We looked at 3 things: gadgets, access to internet, and reading ability. We figured that if students will have modules, we have to know how many of them need support in reading. So we found that most of our students are in group B. They have gadgets, but they have no or limited access to internet. Most are using prepaid load, which means that data depends on whether they have money for load. And given the profile of our students' families, we have a number of parents who lost their jobs. It will be very costly for them to do online calls on platforms like Zoom. From the matrix, we realized that we cannot just give students the modules because we have quite a number of frustrated readers. It should be supplemented by another platform where we can give students the learning support they need. So that's when we started exploring Facebook Messenger as an alternative virtual classroom. We piloted this with an NGO called Ateneo Learning Center during the summer. And the pilot became the basis for how we conducted our classes this school year. We oriented the parents and gave them a taste of the virtual classroom so they can also help us guide the students. For safety, students can use their parents' account to attend the classes, while some students were given permission by their parents to use their own accounts. Some also used Messenger for Kids. Have you heard of this? Messenger for Kids, so the parents can monitor their child's Facebook use. So how did we set it up? So teachers created a professional Facebook account, and we made chat groups for each class. This now became our virtual classrooms. Subject teachers were already included in the chat group so that when it's your turn to teach, you just message the whole class. Well, like in regular classes, we also established rules in the chat group so to make sure that the students respect it as a learning space that's very different from their other chat groups. We also maximized the poll function for check-ins, like asking students how they are, and also for attendance. For our lesson plans, we prepare scripts like this, which we send in chunks so that we don't waste a lot of time composing our messages. You will notice that we use a lot of emojis in the scripts because it helps make it more personal since you're conveying the emotion of what you're saying through the emojis, and it becomes more engaging to the students as well. So I believe that even with digital tools like this, we have to make sure that the students still feel that personal connection with us. I'll show you a picture, this picture from one of our kinder classes. So teachers send a photo of the worksheets, and the kinder pupils, with the help of their parents, they download the worksheets and answer the worksheets by editing the photo and then sending it back. It's funny because in kinder, once in a while, kinder teachers would actually send a video of themselves because some parents reported that their kids do not believe that their teachers are real since they cannot see them, since we're just doing chats. So that's an interesting insight that we got from this. We also maximize the record audio function to either give further instructions, to clarify what we mean in the lesson, or to help frustrated readers. If it's hard to read, they can just listen to the audio recording. You can also see from this picture how we use the emojis from the react buttons to check for understanding. And sometimes we even use the emojis for formative assessments. Like instead of letters for multiple choice, they react using the heart emoji for answer A and like emoji for answer B. The feedback that we got from parents and students, they said they like it because first, it's something that they are already familiar with. In a time of great change, they said it's one less change they need to adapt to. Second, they can go back to the lessons if they miss it, especially for those students who are helping their parents at home. And third, it does not consume a lot of data. There's also a free version of the Messenger in the Philippines. It's free internet access, but with data caps. And when students use the free version, the thing is they can't see the photos and videos posted. So what I do is that whenever I send a photo, I make sure that I also describe what's in it for those using the free version. So you know those standard replies you get when you message a restaurant or a seller on Facebook Messenger? That's called a chatbot. One of my teacher friends, Sir Mike Armentia, I think he's here today, introduced me to chatbots, and I learned how to code to create chatbots for my classes. So I gave my chatbot a persona. Its name is Angel, and it's funny how the kids really interact with Angel as if she's a real person. So Angel would give them options on what they want to do. I give instructions in class and they answer Angel on their own. So it's pretty much self-directed. And according to my students, it's a lot of fun. So for example, here I can choose sumagot, which means in English, to answer. Then Angel will show a list of activities and I'll choose which one I need to answer. Sometimes the kids would choose i-chat si ma'am, which means they need to talk to me. And Angel would reply something like, please type your message while I call Ma'am Sabs. And the students would actually reply back, pakibilisan mo, Angel, ha? So in English, make it fast, Angel, okay? So Angel will always start with a review. Then she'll give exercises. If it's an activity, she explains why it's the correct answer or why it's the wrong answer. Then she gives you your score. So I have a student with autism, and usually he would need help with his work. But for this, he answers the chatbot by himself. And that really made me happy because I realized the Facebook Messenger the chatbot did not just provide access, but it can also be inclusive. So here are some tips if you're interested to use Facebook Messenger or you want to explore it for your classes. The first tip is that we have to be student-centered when making our decisions on what digital tool to use. You know, what's trending right now might not be the best for them. You might come across some very interesting tools and get excited to use it for your class, but if it doesn't fit their context, chances are it will not work. Second, we have to teach students how to protect themselves online. We all know about this, but we take this for granted sometimes because we assume that since students already know how to use the tool, they also know the dangers and risks of using it. But especially with Facebook, we have to teach them to report cyberbullying, to not entertain strangers they meet online, to be smart in dealing with people, and in protecting their personal information. So we have to have an orientation about this and integrate it in our lessons, even if the tool is already familiar with them. The third one is we have to be ready with plan B. Especially at this time of the pandemic, flexibility is key. If, for example, you see some students struggling with the tool, even if you think it's familiar, what else do you have to support their learning? You may also do number 4, maximize the features of the digital tool and integrate it in your pedagogy. So for example, I started using the record audio function of Messenger when a student told me that he finds it hard to catch up with the chats because he reads them slower than his classmates. So lastly, some key learning points. The first one is already familiar digital tools like Facebook Messenger can play a crucial role in providing access and information in distance education. But if you're not careful, it can increase the gap even more. The second key learning point is that the pedagogy is still more important than the tool. It's not the technology teaching the students by itself. It's still us. It's the teachers who design the learning experience with the use of technology. Digital tools will engage and inspire learning in the hands of a very skilled teacher. But even the most advanced tool will be meaningless in the hands of a teacher who is fixed in his or her ways. If we are just transferring traditional lecture formats to a digital tool, we might lose the opportunity that the tool can give us. And the last point is that digital tools are not the answer to everything. Consider the other factors that affect student participation in your class and try to address these concerns. The effectiveness of digital tools is a question of pedagogy, as I've mentioned earlier, but it's also a question of equity. We have to rethink the kind of support we give our students so they will not be left behind. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I turn over the screen back to Mrs. Oracion.
That was amazing, isn't it? Who would have thought that Facebook Messenger could be a main alternative tool for online teaching and learning? Thank you very much for your sharing, Sabrina, and for reminding us that, yes, the tiny virus is powerful and deadly, but little emojis and a chatbot like Angel can be life-giving to our students who have had to adjust to the challenges of remote teaching learning processes. Thank you very much. Now, we are ready to listen to our third panelist. We all know that the concepts and skills our students learn are just as important as the values we try to nurture in them. Our next speaker will share with us materials that can help educators pay attention to both digital literacy and digital citizenship. Fellow educators and friends, let us please welcome Ms. Aury Atienza-Santos.
Thank you for the introduction, ma'am, and good day to everyone. Again, I'm Aury Santos. I'm with the Educational Research and Innovation Office of SEAMEO INNOTECH, which is under one of the 3 regional centers under SEAMEO, and we cater to the needs of Southeast Asian ministers of education. So for today, I'm going to share with you a specific knowledge resource on digital citizenship, which we have developed under an umbrella project called Mobile Technology for Teachers, or MT4T. So MT4T is a project initiated by SEAMEO INNOTECH, which recognizes the rapid increase in the number of mobile device owners in the region, the increasing access to the internet using mobile devices, and the continuing popularity and evolving use of social media, which necessitates the development of digital competencies to address the widening gap between teachers and students in terms of their use of digital technology. We recognize that being proficient in using technology and online platforms is not enough. This must be matched with a recognition of the responsibilities that come along with their use. That's why MT4T resources do not just widen the perspectives of teachers in terms of using mobile technology for education. It also provides specific ways to demonstrate online etiquette, the importance of information privacy, even when being active online, and the emphasis on higher order thinking skills and values. So MT4T is both about digital literacy and digital citizenship. We aim to also help teachers be properly equipped in guiding their learners towards safe, responsible use of digital tools and online platforms. An important MT4T resource and the main focus of my sharing is about e-citizenship. When MT4T was pilot tested in several countries in Southeast Asia, there was a strong recommendation to have an additional resource for teachers to use on the safe and appropriate use of digital resources. So e-citizenship is a response to that recommendation. E-citizenship materials intend to help teachers impart knowledge and raise awareness of online opportunities and risks to their learners. And it also helps to boost their critical thinking skills and cultivate social emotional intelligence among them. E-citizenship has this guidebook which intends to help close the gap that separates teachers from their technology proficient students. The information in the book will acquaint them with cyber wellness and digital citizenship. It gives updates on the recent developments in ICT. It has tips and strategies for learners to be safe and healthy, responsible users of ICT. And it provides classroom activities to enhance the development of emotional intelligence of their learners. Also part of the e-citizenship resources are these activity-based mini lessons called learning packets. In the next slide, I will show you that these learning packets has a teacher's guide and presentation slides. So some learning packets also come with manipulatives that learners will need to use during the learning activity. The PowerPoint slides help teachers execute the instructions in the lesson. They are also very colorful and attractive to make it interesting for the learners. The structure of the lessons were based on the 5A's learning design. The lesson plan starts with an activity and is followed by analysis, and then abstraction, application, and assessment. So here's a sample teacher's guide on being mobile. Here you'll find the rationale, which briefly explains the importance of the topic, the prerequisite knowledge and skills of the learners, which are necessary for them to be able to appreciate the suggested activity, and then an overview of the lesson. So here you'll see the learning outcomes expected from the lesson, the possible integration points for the lesson, and the resources needed for the activity. So the teacher's guide here that you will see, in this teacher's guide, you'll see that there's a matrix that summarizes the main themes covered by a learning packet. And in this learning packet, you'll see that it covers both risk and opportunity, because the topic on being mobile presents both the advantages and disadvantages of using mobile devices. The teacher's guide also comes with sufficient background information on the topic. This will help the teachers feel confident in delivering a specific lesson. The teacher's guide also presents the learning plan. And here you will see that this lesson on being mobile requires some activities to be done prior to the conduct of the lesson. So here now is a description of the main activity for this learning packet. The purely text version that's contained in this teacher's guide is translated into colorful images in the PowerPoint slides. So after describing the activity, the teacher is given a list of questions to ask their students to process the activity. The teachers are also provided with the key learning points that should be elicited from the students. The application suggests ways for the students to demonstrate what they have learned from the lesson. The last part is an activity that will help the teachers gauge how much the students have learned from the lesson. So here is the annex part of the learning packet on being mobile, and it contains the printables. For this learning packet, it describes the mechanics for the game. Annex B presents the deck of cards to be printed, and then the rubric to be used for rating a social media campaign, which the students will need to do as part of the lesson. Another helpful part of an e-citizenship learning packet is this section where teachers are given suggestions on how the lessons can be adapted for other learners. So here I just want to share how we did a minor contextualization of selected learning packets for the Philippines Alternative Learning System. In partnership with the Department of Education and UNICEF Philippines, we did a tagging of competencies to match the learning outcomes of the e-citizenship learning packets with the learning competencies for learners under the Alternative Learning System. ALS learners are out of school youth and adults enrolled in the ALS program to complete basic education. Through the same project with UNICEF and the Philippines Department of Education, which aims for learning continuity amidst this pandemic, we also added a section that suggests how the lesson can be simplified and delivered remotely. So these MT40 resources can easily be accessed from the website. It's also pre-installed in the e-reader application, and it can be downloaded from the mobile app stores. It's free and it's registered under Creative Commons. And then the lessons can easily be integrated into other core learning areas. It comes in several formats. For the ebook, there's an EPUB and PDF version. The teacher's guide has an editable version, which is in MS Word. And then the PowerPoint slides come in PowerPoint. Presentation slides come in PowerPoint. Sorry. Then the materials may need to be contextualized to make the suggested activities appropriate for different learning levels, developmental stage, and age range. The lessons were designed for face-to-face delivery. So some of the activities may need to be modified for online setup. And of course, the materials are designed in English. So for non-English speaking countries, these may need to be translated into the mother tongue. But we have already started converting some of the materials into other languages like Bahasa Indonesia and then Vietnamese. Another consideration, since we're promoting mobile devices, is the limitation in storage capacity and the operating system requirements. So here are some points for us to think about the importance of capacitating our teachers amidst this rapid use of social media and heavy reliance on digital technology. First, there's still many teachers who are not as adapted to the internet and mobile technologies as their learners. So those who are adept at these technologies most likely do not use it in the same way that the learners do. Second, we need to recognize that teachers, including parents, still have difficulty in providing effective training and support to ensure the safety of their children online. Teachers themselves need to develop their own digital citizenship capacities for them to effectively guide their learners to become safe and responsible users of social media and digital technology. And lastly, the potential benefits and risks of ICT activities are sometimes not very obvious. Also, some activities can simultaneously incur both opportunities and risks. That's why teachers need to be acquainted with digital safety and literacy, or the broader concept of digital citizenship and cyber wellness. So one thing that I would like to leave with you, which is still related to digital citizenship, is about managing digital footprint. I had picked this up from the e-citizenship guidebook, and it's a strategy being promoted by an internet safety program called Think. It said that before posting anything online, you have to ask yourself some questions. So one of the questions is about the billboard test. Before you hit that send button or the publish button, ask yourself, if this information were put on a billboard for all to see, will I still be okay with it? So ask yourself that question before you click and make sure you always answer it with a yes. And lastly, I just want to invite you to check out all the other resources that we have in MT40, which you can find in its website and the Facebook community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aury, for the enlightening presentation and the helpful advice. We are very grateful to you for letting us know about the resources that are available at SEAMEO INNOTECH for us to use to enhance our teaching practice. At about the same time last year, June of 2020, we found ourselves groping for handles to make the shift from what we had all been accustomed to towards new ground, a teaching learning modality that we could only imagine then. At that time, there was so much to think about, research about, discuss with colleagues, and generate resources for. But we were also aware that there was no time to lose. Last week, we saw how different stakeholders and members of the communities where our schools belonged and the larger society in general came together to ensure that our young people continued to receive quality education during the challenging times, especially those who come from under-resourced environments. Overall, I think it is fair to say that we survived. But in all honesty, I think our schools, school leaders, teachers, and the education process more than survived. We responded to the call to explore ways by which we can continue to teach, educate, and form the young people entrusted to our care. This past year, we must have seen how there's so much available technology around us. It is easy to get overwhelmed and to lose sight of the more important aspects of the education process, which is to develop the knowledge, skills, and values of our students. And we thank our panelists today for keeping us on track, for keeping us focused on the important goal of our teaching practice by reminding us to always ask ourselves the basic questions before selecting the digital tools to use, and by always keeping in mind that it is our students who are at the center of all these IT-driven initiatives. Once again, thank you very much, Banhar, Sabrina, and Aury. We really learned a lot from your presentations and your insights. I think the presentations have stimulated our participants to consider what they can apply in their respective contexts to enhance the teaching learning process and to strengthen the quality of education in the places where we teach. So thank you very much to all three of you. At this point, we'd like to see how the poll came out. Here, you'll see the results of the poll that we administered a while ago. The question was this: in your opinion, how much did your students learn through remote teaching as compared to face-to-face classes? 8% answered 20%, 51% of the participants answered 50%, 36% answered 80%, 3% answered 100%, and another 3% answered more than what they learned through face-to-face classes. I think the majority responded 50%. And this is a call for action. I think that there's more that we can do so that we can ensure that our students learn the educational outcomes, the learning outcomes that we intend for them to learn. Okay? And let's see, this certainly calls for collaboration as well. The past year has been characterized by a very difficult situation, groping in the dark, but at least at this point, we know more. And some of us know a lot more than others. And so this is also a time where we can collaborate so that this 50% increases to 100% or more, more than 100%. All right. So thank you very much, the Head Foundation, for the results of the poll. At this point, we're ready to strengthen some more, to deepen what we have learned this afternoon through the Q&A. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions for Sir Banhar. So here, this question goes this way. From your experience as the curriculum director of Pathlight School, a school for students with autism, how have you moderated your school's learning content and process to still maintain effectiveness of online learning for these students with special learning needs? And I'd like to add to that another question that you can perhaps segue to. Which device do you use to write on the screen? Can this be used on the laptop? All right. So take your pick,
Thank you
Banhar,
for that
on which
question.
one. Which one would like to answer
The
first?
easy one first. I was writing on a paper app. It can be bamboo paper. It can be note shelf, which I was using. In any case, all the different apps I was demonstrating, even as I was giving the talk, I will post it on my Facebook page. Just search for me and I will make a list of the various apps. In case you did not manage to catch it, the name of the apps were on the slides, even as I was using it. The other question about moderating the content and the process for students with special needs, in this case, autism. As far as content is concerned, we still teach whatever that is required by the Ministry of Education Singapore. In other words, they are still covering the entire syllabus, exception students who are taking the national examinations in Singapore during a pandemic or in the event of a war, in an event of emergency. We got this thing called common last topics that are not tested in the national examinations. In this case, those can be taught and learned after the national examinations. So the content was not changed. Students continue to learn whatever they learn. What the teachers might have done is to curate the content that is to be done synchronously and some content that can be learned asynchronously, rather independently by the students themselves. And the final answer to that question is the process. Our students were prepared, and you probably know for students with autism, preparing them is key in their success. So before the schools closed, they went through practice sessions, rehearsals, so to speak. What do you do when you're at home doing home-based learning? And they do it when they're in school with the teachers, and then the week after or 2 weeks after, they are carrying it out when they're at home. Thank you, Mel, for that question.
Thank you very much, Banhar. Thank you for assuring us that these tools are inclusive. No? I mean, they can be used in different places, in different levels, and in different ability levels of students as well. Now, let me direct 2 questions to Sabrina. Sabrina, here are 2 questions for you. First, what strategies could be supportive for keeping children from harmful websites online? Do we need a detailed course for it, which will address the complications? And a related one, what limitations did you encounter in using Facebook Messenger? Sab?
So thank you for those questions. The first one, well, there are a lot of websites that or apps that also help you determine like which websites are harmful, but we incorporate it in class, like we talk about it. So in general, it's not just giving them a list, but helping them to think critically about when they go to sites, how can they know that it's harmful to them, etc. So it's more about the thinking process and analyzing it, the information that they get, rather than just giving them a list. So for the second question about the limitations, one, we can't always assume that the students understand what even if they react using if they don't do it honestly, you still don't know. So that's one of the limitations. Some students, we found out that they come to class, answer the poll for attendance, and then they go back to sleep after because it's in the morning. So they feel sleepy, so they go back to sleep after. And then we realize that they're not in the group chat, because when we ask questions, they're not replying. So that's how you know that to counter the limitations. But it's really hard to even though like your script is engaging, the activities you bring, but if their home life is not as conducive, it really affects how you do your classes in whatever platform you have.
Okay, thank you very much, Sabrina. And I'd like to direct next question to Aury. Can you help us with this question? It's about the materials offered at the SEAMEO INNOTECH. Are these available materials already? And have there been surveys for the effectiveness of these materials, Aury?
Yes, ma'am. Well, the materials are available. They're online. We have this website, MT40 website, where you can find all these materials. The rest of the ebooks can be found there, as well as the citizenship ebooks and the learning packets. And also some of our partners have started spreading these resources. You can find it in the ICT for ALS website, which UNICEF has put up or set up for specifically for the ALS learners and implementers, so that learning can continue amid this pandemic. So it's there, and UNESCO is also spreading the resources. But in terms of determining the effectivity of these materials or the impact it has among the learners, we have not done that yet. The material e-citizenship in particular was just completed in 2018, and we have not done any survey yet to check the impact.
Thank you very much, Aury. No, thank you for that. Now, I have a question here for all our three panelists. Maybe you can offer to us your thoughts about this question. How do you regulate screen time for different levels of learners to ensure mental and physical wellness? And how has this affected curriculum and instruction? Okay, so I think, fatigue has been observed, difficulties, mental difficulties, and physical difficulties have been experienced. And so our audience is asking us how we can possibly regulate screen time for different levels of learners. Can we hear from you? Maybe we can start with you, Aury.
Screen time management is also a concern for a parent like me. So I realized that regardless of how much you orient your own children to how they should manage their use of the devices, that you really cannot control or monitor them all the time. So even if there's also reminders from the school or there's a policy, you will not be there all the time to monitor what they're doing. So what really is important, we need to make sure that the children themselves recognize why they have to do it, why they need to control their screen time, the impact of this, their effect on their health and their mental abilities as well. It can get affected. So strengthening their own internal capacities, recognizing what these risks needs to be there so that they can themselves control their screen time use. So that's what we need to do. But yeah, so up to that point, parents and even educators can be very limited. The learners themselves need to recognize why they have to limit their screen time use.
Okay, thank you very much, Aury. How about from your end, Sabrina? What do you think about that? How do we regulate screen time for different levels of learners?
Well, first of all, routines really help. So routines at home, because you have to, especially now that there's it's hard to put a boundary between work or school and life at home, because everything's at home now. We have to establish good routines for our children. First, we as teachers, we create what we call a weekly home learning plan. It's a suggested schedule of what a day should look like for the kids. So they attend the chat for a maximum of 2 hours, but with breaks in between. For younger kids, it's less. And then they can, so it's also written in the learning plan, what can they do after? So they do their work, they play, etc. For us, we need to orient parents on what else they can engage the child with, because engagement, for now, I think students are engaged in their gadgets because it's the only thing that's interesting at home. But what if we provide them with activities that can, that would make them leave their gadgets behind, so that there's no like power play between the parent and the child. It's really more getting to know the child and what engages them, and give them that activity so that they themselves put down their gadgets and pick up something else, maybe a book, maybe an activity, an experiment at home. So it's and establishing that kind of routine, so the kid actually knows what to look for in a day. Like they also manage their own behavior and their own learning time. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much for that, Sabrina. Banhar?
I think the answer to that question, how to limit screen time, is also the answer to, in face-to-face classroom, how do teachers limit teacher talk? So when the learning process is made up of various learning experiences, some of which are hands-on, some of which are guided with technology, there will be a good balance between using technology and not using technology. For example, small children can be asked to find common shapes in objects around their house. That doesn't require screen time. But older students learning Merchant of Venice may need to watch the play on the internet and do internet research on the context around the time the play was written for. But afterwards, they need to write in their journals, their reflections, to get to the theme of the play. And that is not requiring screen time. I think as long as teachers do not dominate lessons with teacher talk and provide students with a range of learning experiences as students deserve to have, screen time will be balanced with non-screen time activities. And all that is dependent on whether schools, educators, teachers have explicitly planned to cultivate independence amongst their students while they are with us face to face. If we find that our students are not independent now that remote learning is taking place, we might have failed them all these years when they were in school. Have we done too much for them? Handhold them too much to the point where they're no longer able to operate independently using the benefit of their judgment to make decisions such as those. Thank you, Mel.
Okay, thank you, Banhar. And I think your response also answers this other question. There's another question here for you, but I think you've answered it. Do you think it's necessary? What's that? It's something like, do you think it's necessary for the students to stay, from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock, And I think you have answered that, including the additional question on how you can ensure that the students are on task, when you are not with them. Okay, so thank you very much, Banhar. How about assessment? I'd like to ask our three participants. There's a couple of questions here about assessment. What do you think can be done so that the students are effectively assessed even while we are on remote teaching modality? Or maybe you can suggest some effective strategies for assessment. Can we try to answer this question? Can we begin with you again, Banhar?
I will answer the question by giving a couple of points, maybe 3 points. One is using platform like the one I shared with you, and I have a small hand literally in designing it. The font on the platform Noosphere is actually my writing, my own writing. That's all I can contribute. I'm not technically gifted in that sense. In Noosphere, students are able to do self-assessment because there is a self-correcting function on that device. Teachers can input the task and then it is self-checking. It is self-checking. So that is good because when they cannot get the final answer, they will check back on whatever they have done. So select a platform that can cultivate self-assessment. Second answer to that will be Jamboard. You remember Jamboard, my colleague was doing stuff from Thailand and we all can see what he was doing. Likewise, when students are doing their homework, I, as a teacher, can go into the Jamboard and see in real time exactly what they are doing, what they are getting, and what they are not. I'm able to assess what they have learned, what they have not, in planning for what I need to tell them on the spot. I can interact with them on the spot. As I see they make a mistake, I may question them, or if I see they are saying something correct, I may want them to elaborate. I can interact with them in real time. I don't have to wait till tomorrow after I check their work. And finally, for assessment, I think other than self-assessment and real-time assessment, teachers might also be able to use asynchronous formats, like students doing homework as they would have done in normal times. So that one is nothing new. That is also assessment. Assessment is not just testing. Thank you, Mel.
Those are very concrete suggestions, no? Very specific. Thank you, Banhar. Okay, how about you, Sabrina?
I'm tempted to say something philosophical, just to add to, no, but in my case, because I teach in low-income communities, it's really hard to do assessment. It's one of our challenges because what I realized because of the pandemic, sometimes what I can assess is the home life of the kid. Instead of, because if they cannot answer the assessment, I don't know if they're really learning, but they cannot answer because of their context at home. So sometimes what I tend to measure is, okay, this kid is failing, but the reason he or she is failing isn't because he or she hasn't learned anything, but because he or she cannot get the access to the assessment, or because of something that happened at home, they weren't able to come to class and are not able to do the assessment. So what I realized is that one, in terms of assessment, especially for kids in areas that are, that need more support, formative assessment is still the best way to gauge how they learn. So while you're talking to them, while they're so portfolio assessments, also making them do activities that are engaging to them and which they cannot, because they're engaging, they don't want their parents to do for them, because that's also a question. Like sometimes, mommy, I don't want to do this. It's hard. So you do it for me. But if the kid really wants to do it, they themselves will say, mommy, don't do it for me. I want to do it by myself. So those kinds of assessments really work in our situation. Second, like making the projects more meaningful. Like at home, what problems can they solve at home? If you're teaching science, for example, can they science their way out of that problem and using what you've learned, and then they can tell the story, like, so there's something personal also about the assessment. So that's what we found helpful in our context, because otherwise we will just measuring what happens in their lives instead of really measuring what they've been learning.
Thank you, Sabrina. No, thank you for pointing out that it's not an easy issue and the answers to the question are not straightforward. No? I mean, we cannot insulate the education process or the child who's being educated in a bubble. No? It's not possible. So thank you. But over time, I think we can come up with more of the concrete suggestions that you and Banhar have shared so far. Okay. How about you, Aury? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not very familiar with assessments, but as Professor Banhar had mentioned, self-assessment can be done, and also probably peer assessment. And some of the strategies that I am familiar with, my experience as a parent, is the building of portfolios, and then asking the students to have very concrete output to demonstrate what they have learned. So like creating an infographic that shows what they had picked up from the lesson. And also, of course, discussions, allowing the students to exchange their points of views. And then by listening to that, the teacher will be able to gauge how much the students understand. And well, the traditional way of doing assignments and answering quizzes and exams.
So thank you very much, Aury. Those are very concrete examples as well. And I think maybe in the materials that you named and showed to us, we can pick up many more ideas about assessing the students online, or the balance of assessing synchronously and asynchronously, and so on and so forth. All right. I think we have time for a final question here for the three panelists here. And it's an important question, I think. What policy measures should be suggested or can be suggested to countries who are still not on digitalization in schools? No, I guess where digitalization still requires more work. So what do you think? And it goes on to say, should this be addressed through SDG 2030? But I think the important question for our panelists, based on your backgrounds and experiences in schools, what do you suggest as policy measures so that we are really able to make the leap from face-to-face classes of the past to remote online, remote teaching and learning? Can we start with you, Aury?
Well, in terms of policies, what we've come to understand that adoption of online platforms and integrating the use of technologies can be very different per country. And it will really depend on the priorities of the ministries of education, their areas, their focus areas. And so I don't think it's something that can be dictated by a specific study, for instance. So, for example, in some schools or in some countries, they do not allow the use of Facebook, even when in other countries it's already being recognized as a platform for education. So balancing the correct balancing of using technologies, integrating it in education should always be considered, and matching it with the required digital citizenship skills that students need to also develop. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Aury. How about Sabrina? Any suggested policy measures?
I have a wish list here. Just kidding.
Wow. Okay. You
no.
can
But
start with number one.
No, but I think for digitalization to happen, it's not just the policy, but you have to put up a structure that can support that. Because what can you put in a policy when it cannot happen, like on the ground? Because the structures are not present. Like, for example, in the Philippines, we are still struggling with problems of electricity, lack of access even to like roads, like to sometimes roads or access to information, etc. And we're still solving those problems while we also are trying to move towards the 21st century. And it's not like mostly in the main cities we can establish digitalization, but for the rest of the areas that are like more out of reach, how can you make a policy that can encompass that? So it's very difficult. But I would propose, like, in terms of policy, we have to look at first, what does an effective online lesson or classes look like? What does it look like? When you say digitalization of education, what does that look like for us? And we can define that. It's not just putting up like computer terminals or making teachers teach using ICT. What does that look like for us? Maybe it should be written down so it's clear to everyone, and then we are on the same page and we can work towards it. So maybe that's for me, like clarifying where do we stand in terms of digitalization, and how to make it like an effective way of teaching and learning as we move forwards after the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. And how about you, Banhar?
I think the answer to that question comes in three parts. One is the hardware, the easy part. There must be a policy to ensure that learners have the necessary device, hardware, to engage with online tools. Not just for remote learning, not just for home-based learning, but even in times of face-to-face instruction, we have been talking about using or harnessing the power of technology to improve the teaching and learning process. So ministries of education or governments must have some policy in making sure that every child have some kind of hardware device to engage with this. The second part to the answer is the software. There must be some policy in teacher education, professional development, to help teachers understand what is it that their role as a human teacher is. Some things are better done not by a human teacher, but via technology. And there must be some policy to make sure our teachers are well trained in discerning what their real job is. Some teachers continue to insist on giving lectures when very good lectures are available on the internet, done in 3 to 5 minutes, and then they take an entire hour to do the same exact lecture and less inspirational in many instances because of the length. And the final part to the answer, you have to pardon my bluntness in this case, is that we have to make sure policymakers are people who are smart, people who understand exactly what the field is all about. I have interacted with many people from various governments, and some of them have no ideas about things that Sabrina was talking about, which are very important. And these people do not bother to consult teachers or practitioners, and they really don't understand. Or they prefer not to understand. So I think that is the prerequisite to making whatever policy. The policy makers themselves must be smart.
Thank you very much, Banhar. Are there any politicians or policy makers in our audience? Thank you, Banhar, for, in a sense, summarizing the inputs of the three of you in your response. And actually, before you spoke, I also wrote something like how we wish politicians and policymakers were also educators, no? Or how we wish they were once teachers or principals in our schools, so that the policies that will be created will really be relevant, useful, and responsive to the needs of our schools, our teachers, and the education process. Okay? I think that overall, our presentations today are a testimony that great things never come from comfort zones. I think that's been very clear, no? Each one of you reported on great initiatives that somehow came from a lot of effort on your part, a lot of collaboration, no, from people you work with, but they're great. They're really great. If we were to collect all the effort, no, all the initiatives that our schools, our school leaders and teachers have initiated, no, or have started this past year, I think we will have a lot of knowledge and information that can guide us in the use of digital tools, in bridging the gap, no, in the teaching learning process. Okay. But this is all work in progress. So maybe today I'd like to end with that thought. There is no one specific formula for bridging the gap, okay, that has been created by this pandemic in the education process. There's no one formula for that. But this is work in progress. But we are also consoled by all that our colleagues in education have done to get us to where we are. Let us please note, and let us not be too hard on ourselves. This has just been 1 year in this unusual situation caused by the pandemic. we have been so used to face-to-face classes and, you know, our usual delivery modes for teaching and learning. But we've done a lot this past year. So let's be patient with ourselves, but let us make sure that we build upon what we have started. Let us not abandon what we have started. Let us not continue to dream that we shall go back to pre-pandemic situations and ways. No, let us embrace the reality where we are in now and build upon what we have started so that we may come up with greater things in the future. Okay. With that, I'd like to thank once again our speakers, Banhar, Sabrina, and Aury. And I'd like to turn over the floor to Vignesh. Many of the questions in the chat box, in the Q&A box, related to certificates and recording, PowerPoint presentations, and maybe Vignesh can shed light on these questions. Vignesh?
Thank you very much, Dr. Oracion. And thank you very much to our speakers, to Aury, to Sabrina, and to Banha. It was certainly a very enlightening session. I learned a lot. I learned about all the new tools that we could utilize as educators while trying to navigate this new and uncertain terrain that we find ourselves in. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Oracion has mentioned, there have been a number of questions with regards to certificates. As I shared during our first session, we will be issuing certificates of participation, but it will only be issued to those who attend all 3 sessions. The link to register for the second session will be posted in the chat box and is also available on our website. Recordings of this event will be made available on our website at headfoundation.org by tomorrow evening. Ladies and gentlemen, before I leave, I'd like to share a little bit more about our Making Headway series and the resources that are available on the Head Foundation's website. This is the 3rd series in our Making Headway production. The first series looked at educational leadership in a crisis, and the second looked at building a positive school culture in the new normal. Along with the recordings and a highlight video of those series, we also have produced handbooks, and these handbooks are addressing very specifically tips, suggestions, and actionable tips that our readers and educators across the region can utilize in their practice in their schools. I urge you to visit our website and download copies of ebooks. Some of the books are available also in Bahasa Indonesia and Vietnamese. We'll also be producing a book for this series, so do look out for it, and we'll try to use that to address some of the questions that we unfortunately were not able to do so during the live webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I think one of the big issues that were raised was about the lack of resources, especially digital and technological resources available for educators, particularly in remote communities across the region. Next week, we're going to be looking at how we can rehash some of our older technologies that have been present and have permeated across communities in the region to continue the mission of educating our youth despite the disruptions brought on by this pandemic. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for having attended this webinar. I invite you to register for part 3, and I look forward to welcoming you to our next session. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening. Goodbye.